Welcome to Italics, television for the Italian-American experience. I'm your host, Anthony Tamburri. We're here this month with Maria Teresa Cometto, who is the author of numerous books, the latest one being the book that I have here in my hand, Emma and the Angel of Central Park. And it's her seventh book that she has written and or co-authored with her husband, Glauco Maggi. Maria Teresa, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me here, Anthony.
And so let's first start a little bit about you. You've written 6 books that really had a lot of success, but you're also a journalist. You collaborate with Corriere della Sera. How did Emma and the Angel of Central Park come into view for you? What is the origin of this book?
Talking about myself, so I've been here in New York City since 2000. And originally the first year I lived in Battery Park City, just under the Twin Towers. And so I witnessed what happened. But then my building was damaged by the collapse of the towers, and so I moved uptown and I moved to the Upper East Side. I go almost every day to Central Park. And the Angel of the Waters and the Bethesda Fountain are the heart of Central Park, so very often I go to admire it. And at a certain point I was curious about who was the artist who created it. There is a very small inscription mentioning Emma Stebbins, so I Googled it and I discovered that she was this great artist from New York City, but above all that she created the Angel of the Waters in Rome while she was living and working in Rome. From that on, I was more and more interested, more and more curious about knowing Emma Stebbins, because everybody knows the Angel of Central and the Bethesda Fountain, but Emma Stebbins, I discovered, was almost unknown. Nobody remembered her. So that's
and it's odd, right? Because the fountain has become so famous now in the movies, or for example, it's the backdrop of a lot of movies about love stories. And then, of course, Angels in America. It was very much a present icon in that film. But yet, Emma Stebbins,
totally unknown, totally in Italy, but also here, also in New York. So when I started doing research, I was very surprised that there was almost nothing about her. There is no biography. There was no biography nor in Italian nor in English about her. Very little things in archives. She's mentioned in other biographies, especially biographies of Harriet Hosmer, a colleague of hers, who was more famous than hers at that time and also afterwards, because she was more flamboyant. She was very good at marketing herself, while Emma Stebbins was very shy and reserved. When I started doing my research, I discovered an article on the New York Times, published in 2019. It was belonging to the series
those who didn't get the obituaries in their day.
Yes.
Right.
And so it was an article making amends, because when she died in 1882, the New York Times and neither other newspapers published any obituary. So many years after the New York Times finally wrote the obituary.
Yeah. Emma Stebbins was also, her family was connected to sort of New York, to the people in New York. It was an influential family.
Absolutely, absolutely, and that's also the most famous relative of Emma Stebbins was the brother, Henry George Stebbins, and he was a very important player in New York City in 19th century, because first of all he was one of the most important stockbrokers at the stock exchange. Then he was a philanthropic donor to many institutions. He was one of the fundraisers for the National Historical Museum, for the Metropolitan Museum. He brought the Cleopatra obelisk to New York City. And also he was an important politician. He was a senator of the Democratic Party. And he was the chairman of the commission who ousted the most corrupted political player at that time, Tweed.
Tweed.
Yeah,
right.
Tweed, the Tweed machine.
Right.
Who was very corrupted, and while they were in charge of the city of New York, they had the mayor and all the important administrators in the city. They almost got bankrupt Central Park. They couldn't care less about the park. They only gave jobs to people who promised to vote for them. So they hired not gardeners, but anybody willing to vote for them.
Yeah.
So Henry George Stebbins was really, really important. And also about himself, there is nothing. I went to the New York Historical Society, and there isn't a dossier about him. At the New York Stock Exchange, there isn't anything about him.
That's interesting. So this family has been relegated to the margins of New York City history. Yeah. Here's one of the things that I learned from reading the book is that normally when people think of Americans in Italy in the 19th century, 2 or 3 names come to mind. Margaret Fuller, of course, everyone talks about Margaret Fuller, right? Of course, Henry James spent his time there, whatever, and maybe someone like Amy Bernardi because she was actually coming back and forth and she had both Italian and American. But I learned there was a whole colony of American women, especially American women, living in Italy, doing their stuff, theater, sculpture, painting, etc., and yet we know very little about them. Very little about them both here in the States and there in Italy.
At that time, they lived their own lives in the city. They almost all of them, they didn't speak Italian, so they were into living only in the English-speaking community. So there was almost a dozen of women sculptors from America to Rome. It was never happened before and never happened afterwards that so many women sculptors from America lived and working.
And they knew each other.
Absolutely. They were a community helping each other, also competing with each other, of course, both professional and personal reasons why they moved to Rome. Professionally, because in America there wasn't yet a school teaching sculptures to artists, first of all. Second, because in Italy, in Rome especially, there were so many museums and places like the Vatican Museums, Villa Borghese, Musei Capitolini, where they could go and learn from the masters.
There's a work of art on every street corner.
Yes.
In Rome, in Florence, and there are works of art on every street corner.
Yes. Also, there was the marble. At that time, the marble carved in America was not fit for sculptures. It was fit for houses, architecture, but not for sculptures. Also, there were so many artisans, carvers in Rome who were very happy to help the sculptures. They were specialized also in many aspects of sculpture. There were carvers specialized in hair, in hands, in the robes and stuff like that. And it was a tradition going back to Antonio Canova. If you go to the Museum of Antonio Canova online, you will see the process of sculpture by Canova, and you learn that he didn't do all the work. He designed the sculpture, but then moving from the design and the models, the clay models, to the marble statue, there were a lot of workers doing the heavy work, and Canova would just finish, perfectioning the statue. And so the same did artists in Rome. They used a lot of local artisans doing that. Emma Stebbins didn't do that, by the way. She wanted to do everything by herself. Yes. She was a perfectionist and willing to control everything. Also, it was easier to sell statues to American tourists in Rome than to collectors in America.
Oh,
because,
that's
wealthy families, they would go to Europe for the tour,
right.
And they wanted to bring back to America, to New York, to Boston, souvenirs, and so they were willing to buy arts there, even from American artists.
And have them shipped over.
Yes, absolutely. But finally, there were also personal reasons, far away from their families, who were, of course, of very puritanical morals. They were free to live whatever they wanted. And in fact, many of them, they were living with companions, with women companions. So that was quite extraordinary, like Emma Stebbins.
I think they referred to each other as wife, am I correct? Right?
Yes,
If I remember correctly. So her wife was a very famous theater actress, or actor.
Actor, yes.
In quotes, in air quotes, right? Because she was also famous for playing Romeo.
Charlotte Cushman was the most famous Shakespearean actor. She was from Boston. She became very famous first in England, actually, playing Shakespeare in England. And she was applauded as the true Romeo, which sounds very peculiar, but not at the time, apparently. She became very rich, and at a certain point of her career decided to buy a house in Rome. She bought a house in Rome, and in Rome, Emma Stebbins met her the first winter she moved to Rome in 1856, and it was love at first sight. And since then, she lived together until Charlotte died.
And Emma just went on her own. She just decided that she wanted to go to Italy. She didn't go with friends, or
no. She went with her mother and a sister, Caterina. So for the mother and for the sister, it was the grand tour, and instead she wanted to go there to learn
sculpture.
Sculpture.
So she knew she was going to stay there.
Yes, she knew, and she was supported by her brother, Henry George, who believed in her.
She worked in marble, in bronze, right? And so the other thing I learned was this was really an international piece of art, right? Because she's an American who makes the model in Italy, and then in Rome, and then the final product goes to a foundry in Germany. Am I correct?
Yes, in Munich. In Munich, yes, exactly. Yes, because the Royal Foundry in Munich was the most famous foundry for artistic work. Every artist sent their thing, the models that there, including the American sculpture of the bronze doors of the Capitol in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
The models were sent to Munich, and it took a while to come back here to New York, because in the meantime there was the Franco-Prussian war, problems with payments, and so on. So they arrived in New York City only in 1872, when the Tweed administration was in charge. And talking about how much international is the whole thing, one curious fact is that at the inauguration, that was quite low profile, because Central Park was just recovering from the bad administration of the Tweed. They didn't have much money. So there wasn't a big ceremony. And most of the public attending the ceremony were of German families, because they were so proud of the foundry, yes.
So talk a little bit about your experience putting this book together, because you said before there was virtually nothing on her of any substance, except for when this obituary of the No Longer Forgotten series by the New York Times. There was very little on her.
Yes. The first part, which was during the COVID, I was able, fortunately, to do some research online, because archives would send you digital copies and so on. I also went to Rome, of course, to look into Roman archives, but also there I found very little. I found something about her home in Rome, that was in Via Gregoriana, which is a street that goes down from Trinità dei Monti to Piazza Barberini, more or less. And the area between Trinità dei Monti, Piazza di Spagna, Piazza Barberini was the place where all the artists lived. Then I went to Lenox, Massachusetts, in the Berkshires Hills. That is where Emma and Charlotte went on vacation in the fall, because they would spend the fall and spring in Italy, in Rome. Then they would leave around June because everybody was afraid of malaria.
Right.
And then they would go first to England, where Charlotte had many friends, and then come back to New York and go to Newport. Charlotte had a very beautiful villa in Newport, and they would spend there July, August, and then in September they would move to Lenox, a place with a lot of artists, writers, both from Boston and from New York would go. Nathaniel Hawthorne, for example, spent some time there. There was a very progressive school for girls. That attracted intellectuals and so on. So initially they would go there together, staying in hotels. But then in 1874, Emma bought a cottage there for her companion who was sick with cancer, thinking that spending more time on the hills would benefit her health, and unfortunately it didn't happen. After Charlotte died, Emma went on vacation in there. I went to Dunsville. The curator of the museum told me that they found new documents documenting that Emma stayed there for one summer, trying to recover from her lung disease. She got lung disease because, as I said, she worked on the marble by herself without any help. She did breathe a lot of marble dust. So I went there. I went to Maine, on a beautiful peninsula where there is a fantastic private museum collection and a library specializing on American artists living and working in Italy from the 19th century to the beginning of the 20th century. It's a couple of researchers and scholars. Here they had letters about Emma Stebbins. So yes, it was quite a treasure hunt. That was fun. And in the end, it was rewarding.
And you met with some of her family, right?
Oh, yes, I forgot. The Central Park Conservancy has all the documents about Central Park. And browsing all the documents, I found that taking care of the Angel of the Waters, which is a lot of work, because the bronze get,
oxidized.
Yes,
basically.
the water, the air, everything, the birds. So taking care of the statue is a descendant of Emma Stebbins, Alison Tang. And so I was able to get in touch with her, and she was so nice to having me at her home, which is very close to Central Park. And there I discovered a portrait of Emma Stebbins that was never seen before. That was a very, very beautiful encounter, yes.
This is not her only work in America, right? Emma Stebbins. There are a few other pieces of hers.
Yeah. Here in New York, there are other two pieces, actually. One is big, everybody can admire it. It's Christopher Columbus in Brooklyn, in front of the Supreme Court of the state of New York. It's interesting the fact that Christopher Columbus was not yet a proud symbol of Italian Americans. No. It was celebrated instead as an American hero, the epitome of, the underdog who sailed. Nobody knows if he will succeed. And in fact, he succeeds just at the last minute. And in fact, Emma Stebbins chose to represent Christopher Columbus the last night before the crew definitely says no more, no more. And so he's in doubt if he'll achieve his goal, but he thinks that it was worthwhile anyway. It's very American. I mean, the pioneer going to the unknown, uncertainty, and so on.
And in fact, the first celebration of Columbus was in 1792, when he was celebrated as a representative of, quote unquote, the Americas, the colonies,
Yes.
whatever.
Yes, yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
You know,
So-
the children of the pilgrims who didn't want to be English anymore.
Yeah.
They wanted to be American.
Yeah. There is another statue which is kind of concealed, but again, it's in Brooklyn at the Museum of Art in Brooklyn. It's very nice because it's a kid, and the model was the child of Emma's sister, of Caterina. Yes. Emma couldn't have children, didn't have children, but she was very fond of this kid. Probably he was 5 years old when she used him as a model for Samuel. Under the angel, in the fountain, there are these 4 putti who represents purity, health, peace, and temperance, I think. And it's the same kid. It's the same, the same child.
At one point, you referred to a conversation, I think, as she had, because she always referred to the statue as she. And it's true. It seems that when people think of angels, they think of he. But she always said, wondered what the gender of the angels were, right?
Yeah. If you think especially about Italian, the Italian language and Italians, we talk about angels like males.
Right.
Yes, definitely. Arcangelo Gabriele,
Right,
Arcangelo.
right. The word itself is male,
Yes.
Angelo, right?
Angelo, exactly.
Yeah.
In English, it's more nuanced,
Right.
but again, they are mostly
Men.
with swords
Right.
and stuff. Yes. And instead, in the presentation of her statue on the inaugurational leaflet, she explains, first of all, the origin, what the angel means, and we can talk about that. And then really she writes, she, the angel, she has a bunch of lilies in one hand, she is a messenger, and so on. And that's one reason why at that time, for example, the New York Times wrote a very bad review of the statue. We don't understand what kind of angel this is because she looks like a woman because she has bosom, also she has bottoms. On the other hand, she has muscles, the face looks a male face, so it's a mosaic. Today we would say non-binary statue.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
To me, was very, very interesting.
And let's talk about this now, because you just said, you know, male statues, swords, etc. And instead, this is a very peaceful
Yes.
and peace-bringing angel, right?
Yeah, she got only one request by the architect of the terrace, that he wanted a fountain. He didn't precise what kind of fountain. He only said that it should represent love and the harmony between nature and man.
This is an icon now that everyone knows, right? And yet there's not the interest that one would expect, right?
Yeah.
The amount of interest that one would expect. And that's what just sort of puzzles me, you know. I'm just curious, like, where are the art historians that
I
they
don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's puzzled
And
myself.
on both sides, too. Because what about the Italians? Oh, I say that because it's a way for me then to say to you, hats off to you, because you broke the story both in Italy and in the United States with the book.
Well, the Conservancy published online a long article about the fountain.
For the 150 years?
Yes, only if you go on the website or on Instagram, you will find the article. So myself, with some friends and family, and distributed leaflets saying today is the anniversary. And many people stopped and they were interested. There was a representative of the Conservancy, the the guy who takes care of the statues, Matt Riley, very nice, and he wrote also a very nice blurb appreciation of the book. And so I thought it was really a pity that nobody knew about her life. That was really extraordinary for a woman of the 19th century. Today, I'm happy to say that at the visitor center in the old diary, which is south of the Bethesda Terrace, you can find the book.
I want to thank you for spending time with us.
Thank you so much, Anthony. It was a pleasure for myself to work with you and with your collaborators, and I'm so happy that we made it.
Thank you. Thanks for watching this episode of Italics. I'm Anthony Tamburri. Arrivederci alla prossima puntata.